Hi everyone, it's Shar and welcome back to my channel. It is time for the September wrap up, and will you look at that, it is actually being published in the first week of October and not in November. So that's already a win. So I am going to give you my stats for the month, and then I will tell you about the 9 books that I've read this month. Of the 9 books that I read this month, I gave 1 book 2 stars. I gave 5 books 3 stars. Some of those were a generous 3 stars. I gave 2 books 4 stars, and I gave 1 book 5 stars. In total, I read 2,412 pages. In terms of how I read the books, I read 2 books physically, I've read 3 books via ebook, and I read 4 books via audiobook. And where I got those books from, 1 book was from Kindle Unlimited, 4 books I read on Scribd. I didn't read any books this month from the library, and 4 of the books I did own. With authors, 4 of the authors were new to me, and 5 of the authors were repeat authors, so a pretty even split this month. And that wraps up the stats for this month. I feel like I didn't read as much as I normally do every other month, but September was super busy for me, so I think that makes sense. So let me jump into the books that I read. The first book that I read this month was actually Wolf Gone Wild by Juliette. I started that in August and I finished that on September 2nd. So I count that towards my September reading statistics. I'm not gonna tell you a million things about this book. I've spoken about it so much in previous videos and I am quite frankly sick of talking about it. It is a werewolf who has been cursed. He can't transform, and that is causing his alpha werewolf to give him quite a lot of trouble, a lot of mental stress, and he seeks out a witch named Evie to come and help him break that curse. I gave that book a generous 3 stars because I really did not like it. It was just personally not for me, besties. The next book that I read was Below Zero by Hazelwood. Now, I read The Love Hypothesis last year around the time when it first came out, and I really loved it, but this book was not it. It is my 2-star book, and it was just, let me tell you what it's about. So this book follows 2 scientists. One is applying to work at NASA. She gets into work at NASA and her grant gets approved to go do a super dangerous mission in Alaska or something. I don't know, the North Pole, the South Pole, some very extremely cold place. And then her love interest is Ian, who already works at NASA, is pretty high up, and they have a past and a history. The problem with this book is that it was chaotic in its pacing. We flash back to the past way too many times for how short this book was. The action scene where they're actually in Antarctica or where the hell they are is literally 5 pages. And the sex scene is one of the worst sex scenes, if not the worst sex scene I have ever fucking read in my life. And that's not an exaggeration. This man compares her to Mars or something. And when he comes inside of her, he makes a reference that he's filling the river, even though there's no evidence that water was on Mars. That's literally the conversation they're having as they're fucking. Oh my God. Just no, absolutely not. Anyway, we have to move on because the image of that is scarring me. So the next book that I read is The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is my 2nd Simone St. James, the first book that I read being the Book of Cold Cases, which if you watched my June wrap up, you will know that I did not like, but I'm happy to say that I enjoyed this so much more, and I gave this 4 stars. So we're following 2 perspectives. We have Viv and Carly. In 1982, Viv moves up to the Sundown Motel in New York. She's trying to pay her way to make it as an actress in New York City, but mainly she is trying to escape her family. Now, Viv disappears, and we are many years in the future. It is now 2017, and her niece Carly has also come to New York in Fell, and she's come to the Sundown Motel to figure out what exactly happened to her aunt. And this book follows both perspectives of what happened to Viv, the paranormal things she was experiencing, and then we we are in 2017 following Carly, who's trying to figure out what happened to her aunt while also dealing with her own paranormal shit that is going down at the Sundown Motel, which has not changed in the 30 plus years since Viv has been there. Now, I enjoyed this a lot more than I did the Book of Cold Cases. It was a super quick read. It's something that I felt like I could not put down. I think I finished it within a couple of days, which is great. I love when I can finish a book in a couple of days. There are a couple of love interests in here, but mainly I loved the paranormal aspect of the story. Simone St. James delivering real ghosts who have a huge impact on the story, and a lot of this is about violence against women because so many of the women in this town, Fell has a super high murder rate, are women who were murdered by men. So we just follow that story, and I really enjoyed that supernatural aspect. I love the ghost. I love the conversations around these women who are murdered and like this fascination with true crime, and it was just a great time. Then I read Count Your Lucky Stars by Alexandra Bellefleur. I loved this book so much. Last year I read Written in the Stars, or earlier this year I've read Written in the Stars. At some point, I read Written in the Stars and I absolutely adored it. And I was excited to pick up this book, which follows the roommates in that first book, Margot. Now, Margot is like an astrologist, and she runs a company with her best friend, Darcy. All of her friends around her are now coupled and in relationships, and Margot is single. And that doesn't bother her, but it seems to bother her friends a lot, and it's changing the dynamics of her friendship group, and she's dealing with kind of feeling excluded and like she's no longer part of the group, and navigating changing friendships as an adult, especially when you are in one life phase and your friends are in another. So Margot's love interest is Olivia, and Olivia and Margot actually have a relationship in the past. They used to be best friends when they were kids. They were super close in high school. Something happens and they completely fall out. Olivia gets married and she is divorced when this story starts, and she's a wedding planner. So she is planning the wedding for Margot's best friend, and that is how they run back into each other. This is a second chance romance because there was a lot of miscommunication between the two of them and what went wrong, and it was just such a good time. As always, the writing was amazing. The characters are so well developed and so extremely lovable, and I enjoyed the smut scenes quite a bit. Like, the sex was very well written, but I'm not surprised. It was also very well written in Written in the Stars. It was something that I can remember a lot, and that actually sparked me to want to read more books like that because it kicked off the I'm in my romance era. Let's get into it. So following that, I read Change of Heart by Clare Lydon. Now, this is a story about Aaron. And Aaron's parents are throwing an anniversary party up in the Scottish Highlands where they're from. And her family has kind of been on her about not having a relationship. She's feeling a lot of insecurity. And if anything, she's hoping that having a girlfriend will distract her family from her and help her get through what is a very difficult situation and what is an incredibly difficult family dynamic. So her best friend says, hey, I know this guy who runs this app, and you can hire an out of work actor to be your fake girlfriend for your parents' wedding anniversary, which is taking place over a weekend. At first she's like, no, and then she's like, okay, I'll do it. So it is a fake dating trope. So she hires Steph, and they go up to the Scottish Highlands at this party, and of course they fall in love, but it is about so much more than that because there's a lot going on with the family. I can't tell you more without spoiling the book, but just know it deals a lot with issues of grief and trying to navigate grief, and then also a lot of medical stuff going on. There's a twist at the end, and I'm like, damn, I don't know if I could recover for that. I don't know if I could do it. Look at the cover is all I will say. It will tell you a little bit more about what is going to happen. But ultimately, I did really enjoy that story. It wasn't the perfect story, but the audiobook was super fun to listen to, and it made me want to read more of Clare Lydon's stories. So I gave that, I think, around the 4-star. Then I read A Haunting at Hartwell Hall. Now this is by Rachel Bowder, And I wanted more sapphic romance, but with a paranormal twist, and this came up recommended for me in my Scribd account. So this story follows two characters. We have Blair and Felicity. Blair is a paranormal investigator, and Felicity is the daughter of the hotel owner. This hotel has a lot of paranormal activity. It is causing issues for them and their guests, and that guests are checking out, complaining of weird noises, complaining of ghosts, and the dad decides, I'm gonna hire a paranormal investigator. Felicity is super against this, like aggressively against this. She has a lot of trust issues. She believes that Blair is a scoundrel, that she's essentially there to scam the family out of their money, but Blair is actually psychic. So this story follows them trying to figure out what is going on with the paranormal investigation, and then they fall in love. It is set in 1900s England, so it is a super fun setting, especially because it's in the countryside at this massive, like, beautiful hotel B&B type situation. It's a manor, and the haunting itself is spooky. Like, there's definitely some spooky moments, and there's a lot of ties to the family and the family history. I cried reading this book because content warning for loss of a child in multiple places in this book, but it was something that I did enjoy. However, I would say the romance is definitely not central to the story, although I believe the author intended for it to be central to the story, just based on how it's set up. It really kind of switches to instantly. We go from Felicity being very, very doubtful of Clare and really disliking her to them being in love and having sex. And I'm just like, I don't see that jump. But the reason I don't see that jump is that Felicity was absolutely horrible to Blair and like so aggressive. And I'm just like, she didn't apologize, and that was never resolved. She just kind of expected Blair to get over it and for them to be in a relationship. And that for me ruined the relationship. It was just not a smooth transition from them disliking each other to them being in bed. All of a sudden they were together, but they hadn't had any sexual or romantic chemistry at any point prior to that. Then I read Breathless by Amy McCulloch. Breathless follows Cecily, who is going on this kind of mountain climbing adventure, hiking adventure. She is scaling a massive mountain that people do for extreme sports, and she is doing this for the interview of a lifetime with a very well-known mountaineer, if that's what they're called. It is a closed circle, isolated, super icy, snowy setting with incredibly thin oxygen and a series of murders happening. So Cecily knows that some shit is up, but she's also doubting herself because being at such a high altitude causes hallucinations, paranoia, and she's wondering if perhaps that is what's going on. I thought this book was okay. I did. The setting sounds like something I would love. I love the idea of that, especially being in the mountains and having that layer of knowing that being so high up does cause hallucinations and paranoia, but some things were fumbled. The pacing is off because Amy McCulloch herself is someone who has done the very climb the person has done in this book. But that ultimately left me feeling like this was a story about her climb and her experience climbing the mountains with some fictional murder mystery thrown in just so that this story could fit a thriller vibe. And by that, I mean, it was so bogged down by excessive amounts of climbing information that were at times repetitive that I just think the average reader does not care about. Yes, one thing to fact check and to make sure that everything is accurate, but at times this book felt like reading a climbing textbook, and that is not what I was into. In addition, the murderer was incredibly obvious. Like, I called it almost right away that it would be this person. Literally, as soon as I read the summary, I could figure out who it was going to be. And also there was this twist at the end that I thought was okay, but also didn't really make sense. So I was like, what the fuck is happening? And it has an unsatisfying ending because let's just say the killer never gets their just desserts. I don't remember if I told you what I gave this, but I did end up giving this 3 stars. Sticking with the theme of murder mystery, I read the queen of murder mystery, Agatha Christie. This is my second Agatha Christie book. The first one I read was And Then There Were None. This is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Now, I've heard positive things about this, and I'm holding up the physical copy because I have it, but I did end up reading this on audiobook. In fact, you can see the bookmark right there where I stopped reading it physically. So this was a lot of rich people drama. It was a lot about them and the secrets that they're keeping and the shit that they're getting up to, and this dude named Roger, who they all have a connection to, who has been murdered in his study. So of course we're trying to figure out what is going on, and Hercule Poirot, who is a detective of like Agatha Christie novels, comes out of retirement to help solve this mystery. Now, I've heard that the plot twist is what makes this book, but for me, it wasn't a plot twist, it was poorly plotted. The reason why it was surprising was because there were no hints at all that this is who the murderer was. In fact, it gave me vibes of Survive the Night. If you know, you know. That's kind of what this felt like. And in addition, I thought Hercule Poirot, this is my first time meeting him in an Agatha Christie novel, was a dickhead. Plain and simple. An arrogant dickhead who was absolutely full of himself, believed he was God himself, and I believed like to play God himself in this book. In addition, there's some shit that goes down. I won't tell you who the murderer is because obviously that's a spoiler, but Hercule Poirot essentially says, yo, you gotta kill yourself or I'm sending you to the police. Anyway, besties, I gave that 3 stars because I was entertained the whole time, but I did not have a great time reading this book, and that ending really brought it down for me. And I was there for the plot twist, and it's like, this is what I was waiting for. Cool, whatever. And the final book that I read, because your girl was in a bit of a reading slump at this point, I wasn't really enjoying anything that I was reading. Like, for me to only give 2 4 stars and 1 5 star, it says something. You know, it says something, and I had to stop and say, I think it's me. I think I am just not picking up the right books. This is also a time where I was challenging myself to read off of my physical TBR, so maybe that had something to do with it, because of course, any book that I buy with the hopes that I am absolutely going to love it. So knowing that I purchased a book and didn't really like it doesn't always feel great, but no problem, because I can donate the book. I needed a palate cleanser at this point, and I read The Fighter's Prize by Jessa Kane. Oh, Jessa Kane. I have a history with Jessa Kane books. You all know this if you watch my wrap-ups. They are typically my palate cleanser books because I do think that she can write smut well, but you will know that I have issues with the dynamics between our hero and our female main characters. It is given not what it should be given. Like, these girls are very young with men who really like that they're very young. However, The Fighter's Prize was different, I'm happy to say. This follows Whitney, whose father is an asshole. He has a gambling addiction and essentially has sold his daughter in a prize fight against Maxim and this other guy who is a creep and has been hitting on her and chasing after her since she was like 13 years old. And she decides that she needs to go to Maxim, the other fighter, because if this other guy wins the fight, she's gonna be forced to marry him. But if Maxim wins the fight, then she won't have to. Maxim immediately falls in love with her. She walks in and he's like, I've never felt any sexual attraction for any woman before, and you are the only woman I've ever wanted to fuck, and I want to fuck you now. And they get up to some shit, okay? The power of her pussy gets him to win the fight, and he decides to kidnap her and claim her and say, you're my wife now, we're getting married, and shut up and deal with it. But of course, my girl has deep daddy issues, and part of her is like, literally, she says that in the book, that's not me saying that. She's like, yeah, I'll fuck you. Someone to take care of me for the rest of my life sounds good to me, bestie. There's a lot of shit going on in this book. You don't need the whole summary. I will tell you the reason why I like this a little bit more than the other is that there was an intriguing plot. The world was actually built around them, and that there is like an underground like ring gang leader going on. There's this prize fighting world. It felt like a developed world. I could see everything clearly. The characters were developed. Maxim was a virgin and not much older than our female main character that I believe So they were each other's first, and it didn't give me as many of the creepy vibes as most of Jessa Kane's books do. So that's a win in my book, and that is why I gave that 3 stars instead of the usual 1 or 2 stars I give Jessa Kane books. But I continue to read them because they're not good often, but they are enjoyable for the smut. If you're there for the smut, then you're gonna have a good time. If you think about it too much, you're gonna be grossed the fuck out, depending on which book you read. So that brings me to the end of this video. That is all of the books that I read in September. It was a super busy month for me at work, just in terms of how much I had going on. October will not be that for me, thankfully, so I will be reading much more. I just posted my October TBR, so I will link it here in this video in case you want to watch it. As always, thank you so much for being here, and if you're new, thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you're not sure what to comment, but you would like to comment, you can comment a little snake emoji because of the snake on my necklace, and make sure to subscribe if you are not already and you like my content, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye!